Anyway, the fuck am I talking about? I don't even know. Oh yeah, now I remember. Okay, so sometimes when you make a character, some of the choices you make are, I'm going to say, stereotypical of like a different class. So I'm going to go through two characters I have just kind of waiting around. I don't know if I'll even ever get to play them, but I had ideas for characters, so I put them down. So these two characters are an aberrant mind sorcerer and an undead warlock. And the way their backstories and class interact, it suggests, or at least the way their backstories are set up, it actually, to me, it suggests a different class. But that's because I started with the class combination I wanted and then worked backwards. So, the first character is a half-elf, I think he's a half-elf. Yeah, half-elf aberrant mind sorcerer. Kind of like a sheltered scholar type of character, archaeologist, specializes in like ancient, long dead civilizations, things like that. But he's an aberrant mind sorcerer. And this particular character, I ended up working with a friend of mine to kind of make two joint characters. His character being more of like an Indiana Jones, Rick O'Connell type character, like Shooty McShoot guy, archaeologist, who is still an archaeologist and some sort of scholar-ish character for this university that both characters are attached to. But that other character is more of an action hero type. Whereas my character, who's the sorcerer, is much more reserved and, I don't know, meek? Yeah, kind of a meek character. But in one of their expeditions, this sorcerer character finds like an obelisk to an ancient aboleth. The aboleth tries to use the last shred of its strength to dominate the mind of this new humanoid that showed up. It doesn't work. The aboleth dies, and the sorcerer, Leolenus, is what it's a fun elf name that's shortened to Leo, just because this character ends up with a good deal of this aboleth's psychic power. So then he's a sorcerer. But that backstory in and of itself could really easily be used for a warlock, because you get your power from some external source. And usually for me, the way I look at warlocks are, instead of all of your power is given to you directly from your warlock, for most characters, your warlock or your warlock patron gives you like a shred or a seed or a little beginning of power, along with knowledge and information on how to acquire power on their own. Such that for most warlocks, if they were to breach their contract, they would not necessarily lose their power. It depends on the individual character and their patron and all those things. But for me, most of the time, it's not, because that's more of a cleric situation where you get all your power directly from this god. So, but yeah, this sorcerer feels like, just looking at the backstory, feels like he could be a warlock instead, but he's an aberrant mind sorcerer instead. Then this other character, who is I think I made him a half-orc? Yeah, half-orc, undead warlock. He is a shaman of his tribe. Group? I don't know. I don't have any information for where he comes from yet, but he's a shaman of some kind, and he comes from a society that venerates ancestors, and those same ancestors are his warlock patron. Strings of ancestor spirits going back thousands of generations, or however, that's a long time. That's okay, maybe not thousands, but a lot of generations going back, and that's where this character gets his power, through ancestor veneration. But that backstory could line up with either a druid or a cleric. And a lot of these things, it's wide open as to what you really want to end up doing with a character. Like, for example, if you want to play, like, let's say you like the idea of having a warlock patron, but you want to play a martial character, and for some reason you don't want to take Hexblade because you like the features that fighter gets more. Well, have a character who enters into some sort of pact with a powerful entity, but instead of getting warlock magic, you get martial weapons training and everything that comes along with a fighter downloaded directly into your brain instead, and that's what you get. That's your benefit for becoming a warlock, even though you're actually a fighter. Things like that. And you can do that fake warlock angle on almost any class. It's just, instead of from your bargain, instead of getting warlock magic, you get whatever class features it is, and then depending on the individual character and patron, then you have to keep up and continue to do certain things, either to advance or to continue to gain these benefits. Like, for that fighter character who's a warlock, if you breach your contract, do you just lose all your martial training? Is that how it works? Those are different ideas. Or just like the idea of a cleric that doesn't actually get their, like a cleric, there's all the mechanics in place to interact with a god or some sort of divinity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For example, in Critical Role Campaign 3, there's a little robot, one of the player characters, this little robot automaton, and he's a cleric. They're a cleric. And they haven't said anything about a god they worship. They just have cleric class features. Maybe it's something, we'll find out eventually. Maybe it's something built into the robot itself, but, you can always twist and change things however you want, however you envision this particular character. And that's one of the reasons I kind of prefer the kind of more hands-off approach that Wizards of the Coast takes with designing stuff for 5e. Because, like how in old editions of the game, if you were a paladin, you had to be lawful good. And that was it. If you weren't lawful good, and how rigid alignment used to be, first of all, but if you weren't this really specific alignment and acted in specific ways, you'd stop being a paladin. And something like that has kind of continued, but in 5e, paladins technically, they don't necessarily get their powers from a deity. They technically get them from their oath, but that's up for interpretation, and you can change that around. But they have to follow really specific things related to, like, the subclass they pick, to their oath. But those things are usually while those individual oath tenets are usually highly specific, they're general enough that you can interpret them. There's room for interpretation on them. And most class features can be twisted and interpreted in certain ways. Like a barbarian's rage, while it's called rage, you can interpret it however you want. It can be a battle trance. It could be activating your power armor if you're doing a character like that. It could be switching on a bunch of magical empowering tattoos that you have all over your body, and you can only do that so many times a day. That kind of thing. So there's room for all these different types of interpretation, and I personally like that and like having that room that I can come up with something on my own. But I know there's other players that do need that additional prompting so they can so that they can start from somewhere. And both of those are fun. That's it for this one.